This is my ranking of 2D action platformer games that I've played, based purely on my personal experience. Each one is placed from masterpiece down to trash, depending on how smooth the movement feels, how tight the combat and platforming are, and how well the level design keeps the action engaging. Let's get straight into the list. Mark of the Ninja Remastered turned every level into a careful balance between patience and quick decisions, and I liked how much control it gave me over each situation. The stealth systems were easy to understand, but there was still plenty of room to get creative with how I approached enemies. I could stay hidden in the shadows, distract guards, or quietly remove threats without the game forcing a single solution. The movement felt smooth, making it easy to climb, sneak, and move through levels without frustration. I also liked how the upgrade system expanded my options, while keeping the core mechanics useful from beginning to end. New enemy types and level designs kept me thinking instead of relying on the same strategy every time. That quality secures its spot in my masterpiece tier. Abathor felt like a trip back to the arcade days, where success came from learning enemy behavior, reacting quickly, and making every life count. I liked that each character had different strengths, which made trying new fighters feel worthwhile instead of repetitive. The combat was easy to understand, but later stages demanded better timing and positioning as tougher enemies and bosses appeared. Collecting currency and spending it on upgrades added a nice sense of growth during each run. I also enjoyed seeing new environments because they kept introducing different hazards and challenges. The pixel art looked great, the music matched the action well, and co-op made the adventure even more fun. The lack of a proper save system could be frustrating, but the gameplay was strong enough to keep me coming back. I placed this game in my great tier. Shovel Knight Treasure Trove offered far more content than I expected, with multiple campaigns that felt distinct enough to justify playing through all of them. I liked how every character changed the way I approached levels, whether it was using a shovel, throwing bombs, or moving across stages with faster abilities. The platforming required good timing, and the boss fights kept introducing new challenges that stopped the adventure from becoming repetitive. Spectre Knight stood out the most because his movement felt smooth and rewarding, while the other stories expanded the world from different perspectives. The pixel art captured the feel of classic games while still looking detailed and colorful. I also spent a lot of time appreciating the soundtrack because nearly every area had memorable music. This game finds its place in my excellent tier. Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze showed me how much level design can carry a platformer when every stage introduces fresh ideas and uses them in clever ways. I was always curious to see what came next because the game kept changing its challenges, themes, and obstacles without relying on the same tricks for too long. The platforming demanded good timing and precision, but it rarely felt unfair when I made a mistake. I also liked how the different environments felt distinct from one another, making the journey feel varied from beginning to end. The minecart and rocket stages added extra excitement, while the tougher sections pushed me to improve rather than quit. Combined with great visuals, memorable music, and strong world design, this was an easy choice. This game finds its place in my excellent tier. Iron Meat delivered exactly the kind of fast-paced action I look for in a run-and-gun platformer, while adding enough personality to stand apart from the games that inspired it. I spent most of my time reacting to constant threats, dodging attacks, and switching weapons to handle whatever appeared on screen next. The controls felt responsive, which was important because the game rarely slowed down and often filled the screen with enemies, hazards, and massive bosses. I also liked how every stage introduced new ideas instead of repeating the same challenges over and over. The grotesque art style gave the world a unique identity, and the heavy soundtrack matched the chaos perfectly. I only wish there was more content because I wanted the adventure to last longer. That places it in my great tier. Neon Inferno combined classic run-and-gun action with enough unique ideas to keep me interested from the first mission to the last. I liked that I had to pay attention to both the foreground and background during fights, because it added an extra layer of challenge that most games in this style do not have. The bullet deflection mechanic was the highlight for me. especially when slowing down time and sending enemy attacks back across the screen. The action stayed fast, the controls felt responsive, and the bosses regularly introduced new mechanics that tested my reactions. I also thought the cyberpunk setting was brought to life through excellent sprite work, colorful environments, and detailed animations. Some progression systems felt restrictive, but the gameplay remained strong throughout. That secures a spot in my great tier. The Messenger started as a straightforward ninja platformer, but it kept expanding in ways that made the adventure much more interesting than I expected. I liked how new abilities gradually opened up movement options, making exploration feel more rewarding as the game progressed. The controls were smooth, which made platforming challenges feel fair even when the difficulty increased. I spent a lot of time jumping between hazards, avoiding projectiles, and figuring out enemy patterns, and the game rarely felt frustrating when I failed. The different areas also stood out because each one had its own atmosphere, visual style, and obstacles. Boss fights were another highlight since they required me to make good use of the skills I had learned along the way. In the end, this adventure settles into my great tier. Contra Operation Galuga brought back a lot of what I liked about classic run-and-gun games, even if it did not do much to push the series forward. I had fun blasting through waves of enemies, dodging projectiles, and swapping between different weapons depending on the situation. The weapon upgrade system added a little more strategy, and I liked having the option to overload weapons for powerful effects when things became chaotic. Several stages stood out thanks to their set pieces, boss fights, and fast pace, while the new playable characters offered some variety through their unique abilities. At the same time, I felt like the game relied heavily on nostalgia and rarely surprised me with new ideas. The action stayed entertaining throughout, but it lacked the creativity needed to rank higher. This one lands in my good tier. Vengeful Guardian Moonrider captured the feel of classic action platformers while still adding enough ideas to keep me interested through the entire adventure. I liked how the movement was built around speed, with running slashes, wall jumps, and dive kicks making every stage feel fast and energetic. The level variety also helped a lot because each area introduced different hazards, layouts, and challenges instead of repeating the same formula. Boss fights were another highlight, as they pushed me to learn attack patterns and find openings to strike back. Unlocking new weapons after defeating bosses added more options during combat, and the upgrade chips let me customize my abilities in useful ways. Some upgrades made the game easier than I would have liked, but the strong action, great pixel art, and memorable bosses place it in my good tier. Rayman Legends kept raising the bar with every new stage, making it difficult to predict what challenge or idea would appear next. I liked how the game built so much variety from a simple set of moves, constantly introducing fresh mechanics, creative obstacles, and clever twists that stopped the adventure from becoming repetitive. The platforming felt smooth and responsive, while the pacing made even the tougher sections feel fair and rewarding to overcome. I also enjoyed how each world had its own identity through colorful environments, expressive animations, and unique visual themes. The boss fights added memorable moments, and the hidden collectibles encouraged me to explore beyond the main path. Few platformers managed to stay this creative for so long without losing momentum. This game belongs in my masterpiece tier. Shadow of the Ninja Reborn challenged me far more than I expected, relying on careful timing, enemy memorization, and quick reactions rather than simply letting me rush through each stage. I liked having access to both the katana and chain weapon because they made combat feel versatile and satisfying against the many enemies standing in my way. The game also captured the feel of old-school action platformers, where every mistake mattered and progress had to be earned. While I enjoyed the combat, the platforming could be frustrating at times due to the wall-clinging mechanics, and managing secondary items during intense moments was not always convenient. Even so, I appreciated the variety of enemies, tough boss encounters, and constant sense of danger. The excellent pixel art was another highlight throughout the adventure. This one settles into my good tier. ghosts in Goblins Resurrection tested my patience more than most platformers, but overcoming its challenges was also what made the experience rewarding. I spent a lot of time learning enemy placements, adjusting to Arthur's limited movement options, and figuring out which weapons worked best in different situations. The difficulty could be brutal, yet the game offered enough options to make progress without completely removing the challenge. I also liked how each stage introduced new hazards, mechanics, and set pieces that prevented the adventure from feeling repetitive. Unlocking upgrades and expanding my arsenal added useful choices during tougher encounters, especially against bosses with different attack patterns. The hand-drawn visual style gave the game plenty of personality, and the alternate shadow stages added extra replay value. That is enough to earn a spot in my good tier. Sanabi delivered some of the most satisfying movement I have experienced in a 2D action platformer, making every swing, dash, and grapple feel fast, precise, and rewarding. I loved how the mechanical arm was used for both traversal and combat because it constantly kept me engaged while moving through each area. The platforming demanded skill, but the controls were so responsive that most mistakes felt like my own rather than the game's fault. I also enjoyed how enemy encounters and boss fights pushed me to master the movement system in different ways instead of relying on simple attacks. Beyond the gameplay, the story ended up being much stronger than I expected, with characters and plot developments that kept me invested all the way through. Few games excel at both gameplay and storytelling like this. That secures its place in my masterpiece tier. Replaced offered much more than I expected from a 2D action platformer, combining strong gameplay with a world and story that kept me invested from beginning to end. I enjoyed exploring its cyberpunk setting because every location felt detailed and filled with interesting characters, lore, and side activities. The combat stood out thanks to its deliberate pace, requiring good timing, dodges, parries, and smart target selection instead of mindless button mashing. I also liked how the platforming sections worked as small puzzles, asking me to use different tools and abilities to move forward. Reach was a compelling protagonist, and watching his journey unfold added weight to every major event. A few technical issues and frustrating checkpoints held it back slightly, but the combination of storytelling, combat, and atmosphere was excellent. That places it in my great tier. Mega Man 11 stayed close to the series formula, but it still delivered the kind of challenging platforming and boss battles that kept me engaged throughout the adventure. I liked how the double gear system added a new layer to the gameplay, especially the ability to slow down time during difficult jumps, enemy encounters, and intense boss fights. The stages were demanding and often required patience, precision, and repeated attempts before I could finally reach the end. I also enjoyed experimenting with different weapons, because some were far more useful in certain situations than others. While the game introduced a few good ideas, many of the bosses and abilities felt familiar, and it rarely surprised me in the way some of the best entries in the series have. That was enough for a place in my good tier. Ninja Gaiden Ragebound captured everything I want from a modern action platformer by combining fast movement, challenging combat, and excellent level design. I spent most of the game balancing quick decisions with precise execution, whether I was chaining attacks, managing hypercharges, or using the guillotine boost to stay in control during intense encounters. The combat felt simple at first, but it kept revealing new layers as stronger enemies and tougher bosses demanded better timing and smarter use of my abilities. I also enjoyed how the platforming worked alongside the combat instead of feeling like a separate system. The pixel art looked fantastic, the soundtrack matched the action perfectly, and the replay value was strengthened by collectibles, challenges, and score chasing. This adventure earns a place in my excellent tier. Katana ZERO blended fast action, precise timing, and storytelling in a way that kept me invested throughout the entire experience. I liked how every room felt like a small puzzle, where I had to figure out the safest and most efficient way to eliminate enemies without getting hit. The one-hit death design could have been frustrating, but the instant restarts encouraged experimentation and made each failure feel like part of the learning process. Slowing down time, deflecting bullets, and using objects from the environment created a lot of satisfying moments during combat. I also appreciated how the story unfolded through conversations and unexpected twists, making me curious about what would happen next. The stylish presentation, strong soundtrack, and replay value tied everything together nicely. This adventure earns a place in my excellent tier. Kaze and the Wild Masks brought back the style of classic platformers I grew up enjoying, while still offering enough challenge to keep me focused the whole way through. I liked how the movement felt familiar and responsive, making jumps, glides, and attacks easy to control even during tougher sections. The different animal masks were the highlight because each one changed how I approached levels and added variety to the adventure. I also spent time searching for collectibles and hidden areas, since the game rewarded exploration with extra content rather than treating it as an afterthought. The boss fights were simple but satisfying, and some of the later platforming sections required real precision to overcome. While it stayed very close to its inspirations, the strong level design, colorful presentation, and rewarding challenge place it in my great tier. Guns, Gore, and Cannoli 2 took what worked in the first game and improved many of the areas that felt limited before. I liked how the twin-stick aiming made combat much smoother because I could react to enemies from any direction instead of being restricted to basic angles. The shooting remained the main attraction, with a wide selection of weapons that made blasting through zombies, mobsters, and Nazi soldiers consistently entertaining. I also appreciated the improved movement since the added double jump and better controls made platforming sections feel more responsive. While I missed some of the zombie variety from the previous game, the different enemy factions still kept encounters interesting by forcing me to deal with cover, explosives, and ranged attacks. The action stayed fun throughout without dragging on. This one earns a place in my good tier. Tales of Iron surprised me with how much depth it packed into a world filled with rats, frogs, and other animal factions. I liked how the combat focused on timing and reactions, forcing me to decide when to dodge, block, or parry instead of attacking without thinking. The different weapons and armor sets also encouraged me to adapt my approach depending on the enemies I was facing. Beyond the combat, I found myself invested in Reggie's journey as he worked to rebuild his kingdom after a devastating invasion. The story handled themes like war, revenge, and leadership better than I expected, especially considering most of the characters communicate without traditional dialogue. A few mandatory side activities slowed the pacing at times, but the strong atmosphere and satisfying combat place it in my good tier. SHINOBI Art of Vengeance delivered the kind of fast and stylish ninja action that kept me engaged through every stage. I liked how smoothly Joe Musashi controlled because both the combat and platforming felt responsive, making it easy to react during intense encounters. The combat system had enough depth to stay interesting, with new attacks, ranged options, and special abilities adding more ways to approach fights as the adventure progressed. I also enjoyed exploring levels for upgrades and collectibles, especially after unlocking new traversal tools that opened previously blocked paths. The boss fights were another highlight, particularly the duel-style encounters that felt more skill-based and rewarding to master. While the game could feel a little repetitive during longer sessions, the excellent visuals, strong level design, and satisfying gameplay earned it a place in my excellent tier. Cyber Shadow captured the spirit of classic ninja platformers while adding enough modern ideas to make the experience feel fresh. I liked how the game focused on precise movement and careful decision-making rather than simply rushing through enemies and obstacles. Every new ability expanded both combat and traversal options, which kept the gameplay evolving as I progressed through the campaign. The bosses were a major highlight because they demanded pattern recognition, quick reactions, and consistent execution before I could claim victory. I also appreciated the generous checkpoint system since it made difficult sections challenging without becoming exhausting. The pixel art looked fantastic, and the soundtrack did a great job of building tension during intense moments. A few mechanics could have been explained better, but the strong gameplay and excellent presentation place it in my great tier. Terminator 2D No Fate felt like a throwback to the action games I used to play, capturing the spirit of classic run-and-gun adventures while staying faithful to the movie that inspired it. I liked blasting through waves of enemies, switching between different scenarios, and revisiting memorable moments from the film in pixel art form. The shooting mechanics were straightforward, but the action stayed engaging thanks to vehicle sections, alternate stages, and a few gameplay changes that broke up the pace. I also appreciated that later playthroughs offered different choices and paths, giving me reasons to come back and see new outcomes. The visuals did a great job recreating characters and scenes despite the retro presentation. It is not a particularly long game, but it delivers enough challenge and replay value. That places it in my good tier. Blazing Chrome delivered exactly the kind of intense run-and-gun action that rewards persistence, quick reactions, and a willingness to keep trying after failure. I liked how closely it captured the feel of classic arcade shooters while still adding a few modern conveniences that made repeated attempts less frustrating. The action moved at a relentless pace, constantly filling the screen with enemies, explosions, bullets, and giant mechanical bosses. Every stage introduced something different, whether it was a vehicle sequence, a mech section, or another challenge that changed the rhythm of the gameplay. I also appreciated the variety of weapons and the satisfying destruction that followed every successful run through a difficult encounter. The difficulty could be brutal and occasionally felt unfair, but overcoming those obstacles was part of the appeal. This game finds its place in my great tier. Huntdown gave me the feeling of a classic run-and-gun game, but with cleaner controls and sharper level design than the older games it pays tribute to. I liked how the action stayed focused on quick movement, smart cover use, and steady shooting, instead of overwhelming me with messy mechanics. Every stage had its own personality, from the enemy groups to the boss fights, and that kept the campaign moving at a strong pace. The pixel art looked packed with detail, and the neon future setting gave the whole game a lot of style. I also liked that the checkpoints made repeated attempts less tiring while still keeping the challenge alive. With local co-op and plenty of replay value, this is the kind of game I kept enjoying every time I returned. That sits in my excellent tier. That's my ranking of 2D action platformers I've played. A handful delivered incredible movement, combat, and level design, while others struggled to stay as memorable once the novelty wore off. Thanks for watching.